particular episode of live discussions. Coronavirus live discussions have been going on for some time, and this is the 15th edition. We have looked at various aspects of the impact of coronavirus, and they've ranged from technology to science to politics to media. And today we are looking at the issue of misgovernance. But before we go there, may I invite you, if you are on Facebook, to consider organizing a watch party. And if you are watching on YouTube or on Facebook, to consider subscribing to this channel so that you can be informed of future episodes and be drawn into discussions and so on of these important topics. I'd like to begin by introducing Vishal, who certainly does not need introducing if you've been watching these programs. And if you haven't, you may know him by general reputation because he is extremely well known. He was born and brought up in India, is a philosopher by training, but felt called by God to go and work in the grassroots in India and worked in remote and backward situations till he realized that grassroots work was fine, but was not going to have any great impact because the systems are such that they prevent people from developing. And so he got involved in political action in the country at a national level, and then got frustrated with politics because he realized that politics itself needs to be reformed. And of course, politics cannot be reformed without cultural reform. And so he is nowadays very involved in an international initiative to reform education, because education, of course, is the heart of the next generation growing up, as well as the reformation of people who are around working and so on today. Vishal is being invited to speak in 21 different countries. 45 different countries physically, not by Zoom and so on, but physically in 45 different countries. He is the author of 21 books, which are available in 16 languages, 6 of them Western European sort of languages, 6 Indian languages, 3 languages from the Far East, and 1 I don't know, but there's obviously a 16th language as well in which his books are available. May I invite Vishal, please, to say a few words to explain what this live talk series is all about.
Thank you very much, Prabhu, and welcome to our guests, as well as all of those who have tuned in to Facebook and YouTube. We have been blessed to have Professor Prabhu Guptara and behind the scenes Andreas Wieland and also Hans Joachim helping us to organize this series, which began soon after pandemic hit the world, because on the one hand, we had news medias which people questioned their integrity, that they were not reporting but spinning what was going on for their own political or whatever interest. Then on the other hand, at the grassroots, there were many conspiracy theories from how different billionaires were trying to take over the world, or some eschatological conspiracies. So we felt that we are called to seek wisdom, and therefore we must consult people who are experts in their field and learn from them how their disciplines are perceiving coronavirus. So this whole series is part of our obedience to our calling to seek wisdom, not the latest conspiracy theories, but truth. So this is a part of learning, and we are engaged in planning what we call the third education revolution, but we will start a new series on that next month in in January, rather, next year. For now, I want to thank Professor Guptara for leading us in these sessions. He sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes moderating. He used to be responsible for training leadership in what was then world's largest bank. And now he has launched a very interesting publishing house, which is, as Indians have spread all over the world, which is giving a platform for Indian writers to impact their own nation as well as the world through publishing. So we are very grateful to him, and it is his vast network of people that have been serving us as resource people. So thank you very much. These lectures have all been, these live discussions have all been freely available. You're welcome to donate. The group that has done the most work is called truthandtransformation.org, truthandtransformation.org, out of Stuttgart, but it is a European group. So we are very grateful to our friends in Europe for leading us in this effort, and you can go on their website and make a donation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vishal. And I should also add that as you are listening to the program, you may have questions, and you are welcome to put the questions in either through Facebook or through YouTube, and they will be filtered for any nonsensical stuff that certain people may want to put in. But your good questions will come through to me, and then I will have the challenge of picking the right question at the right time to put to the right panelist, or two or all, as the case may be. So encouragement to put in your questions. Our topic today is, of course, misgovernance and pandemics. Well, pandemics, okay, we kind of have an idea what pandemics are, but what is misgovernance? Is there any kind of definition of it, any kind of standard for it? I'd like to suggest that there is actually an objective standard for misgovernance, just as there is for pandemics. We, as a global society, have authorized the World Health Organization and given them the infrastructure and the resources by which they can gather all the information and decide that a pandemic is really on the way. And on the basis of the infrastructure which gives the information, the World Health Organization says at a certain point, folks, a pandemic is on the way. And along with that, at that moment, governments have a contractual responsibility, because we've all agreed it, and the contractual responsibility is set out in the international health regulations that were agreed and announced in 2005. Now, I'm not sure if they've been updated in any way since then, but certainly since 2005, there's been an agreed set of arrangements. So at the very least, we could say that misgovernance consists in not following those international health regulations, which all of us have agreed. I mean, there's no point in agreeing rules if you're not going to follow them and obey them, is there? It's like saying we're going to play a game of football, we've appointed an umpire, but when the umpire says, that's a foul, we just ignore him and keep playing, or her, as the case may be. The whole point of having an umpire is that you follow the decisions of the umpire. In the same way, the WHO is the umpire, the international health regulations are agreed, but unfortunately, often not followed. That, I would suggest, is the minimum definition of misgovernance. But there is actually a wider definition of misgovernance that we may want to keep in mind. What is that? Well, that is that, well, I need to take a step back and point out that human beings are at greater risk today of pandemics than they have ever been. So if you go back sort of 500 years or 600 years, we have very little evidence of viral pandemics. But in the last century, the 20th century, we had 10 pandemics. 100 years, 10 pandemics. But already in this century, 20 years, we've had 6 pandemics, or we are on our 6th pandemic. Why is that? That is because human beings are at greater risk today than they have ever been, because of greater exposure to the animals that are hosts to these viruses. Now, in natural settings, jungles, rainforests, and so on, these viruses have plenty of scope for their own survival and reproduction and so on. But as human beings have gone in and undertaken massive deforestation, or if there have been forest fires, deliberate or otherwise, due to climate change and so on, the behavior of the intermediary agents, the agents between the viruses and us, changes so that the viruses can move from the animals to human beings much more easily. For example, mosquitoes, which usually in the past focused simply on monkeys, have started focusing on human beings, and therefore certain viral pandemics have spread to human beings as a result of that. The same applies to bats and various other animals. That's in the natural world, but what about a human, a man-made situation, which is industrialized livestock farming? You may remember that in 2014, tens of millions of live poultry in North America had to be culled, had to be killed in order to stop the spread of a particular variety of influenza. In the southwest of France, a mass slaughter of ducks had to be organized because a particular variety of influenza was detected in southwest France, which was thought to be able to reach pandemic proportions. Swine fever, you may remember, decimated China's pig herds, which had been raised in particular conditions of hygiene and human-animal proximity, and therefore they were essential to remove. Now, what we have today is increased use of intensive farming practices, and virologists and veterinarians have become alarmed about the major risk to human health posed by factory farmed animals. Why is that? Because livestock is farmed accompanied by selective breeding in order to increase productivity. And because of that, the animals become genetically identical or almost genetically identical. And that means, of course, that they have weaker immune systems with greatly reduced ability to resist disease. What is the evidence of that? Because all these animals have to have massive use of antibiotics in order to prevent them from contracting infections of various sorts, diseases of various sorts. So both from human incursion into forests and so on, which we could regard as an issue of global governance, and as a result of factory farming, livestock farming, which we could argue has the wrong parameters, the wrong regulations around it, we have the possibility of pandemics spreading. We could say, therefore, that there's a thin definition of misgovernance, not sticking to the rules set up by common agreement, and there is a thick definition of misgovernance, meaning human beings have not taken responsibility and have not acted responsibly in relation to wild animals and in relation to livestock that is farmed industrially. So that's just to set the scene, and I would like to begin by introducing one of our three panelists and then go step by step to the others. May I start with Will Inboden? Dr. William Inboden is a professor at the University of, I'm sorry, I'm getting a blank at the moment, but Will, you and I met in London when you were working in London, and you have had a particular interest and expertise. You're regarded as one of the top experts in the whole field of security. But of course, this is not biosecurity necessarily. This is more military security and geopolitics and so on. What is your perspective on the two definitions that I have given? Would they seem to you to be reasonable, accurate, overblown, or what?
Thank you very much, Professor Guptara, and it's the University of Texas. So that's right, and no problem at all that you might forget it. But the folks who signed my paycheck would be unhappy with me if I didn't specify that. So that's right. So anyway, no, I think that's a wonderful framing that you had for the current challenges that we are facing. And again, as you mentioned, my disclaimer is I'm not an expert on global health or pandemics or virology or any of the scientific or medical aspects here, but rather what I study is geopolitics, is the nature of the international order, what drives conflict between states, what produces peace and security, so on and so forth. And to expand on your initial reflections there, I want to turn, if I can, to wisdom from the biblical text, which frames a lot of how I think about geopolitics. First, in the Old Testament, in Genesis chapter 2, in the account of God's creation of the world, we see a mandate given to Adam to cultivate the garden and then to name the creation. And for Christian thinkers on international relations and thinking about governance, we see there that the task of maintaining peace and stability and global order is analogous to, or is derived from, those original commands to cultivate the garden and then to name the creation. That's a lot of what international relations really involves, is categorizing, making sure institutions are in their proper place, are relating well to each other, are carrying out those functions of good governance. The second biblical text that inspires a lot of Christian thinking on these topics comes from Paul's first letter to Timothy in the New Testament, 1 Timothy, where Christians are commanded to pray for kings and those in authority so that we may lead peaceful and quiet lives. And I think there's no better description of the calling of statecraft, including managing pandemics, than how it affects the average citizens, average people around the world, that they may be able to live peaceful and quiet lives in some ways, so that they don't need to worry so much about geopolitics and war and conflict and pandemics. And so connecting this calling of good governance, it's not just an abstract concept for graduate seminars. It's something that has very real world applications for people all over the world, including some of those vulnerable, to live those peaceful and quiet lives.
Yes, and of course, the two quotations you've given us is one from the Jewish scriptures, which Christians call the Old Testament, and the other is, of course, from what Christians call the New Testament. But of course, those two principles would apply, I guess, without any difficulty to people who are Hindus, Muslims, atheists, or whatever, because I think everybody, as a human being, has the natural ability to be able to name, categorize, compare, contrast, etc. And every human being has the desire to live in freedom, prosperity, and of course, peace. Yes. But if I may address a particular question to you in relation to the pandemic, would you agree, and maybe you don't, that the pandemic has changed the geopolitics of our world? And if so, in what way?
Sure. No, absolutely. It has changed the geopolitics of our world. And this is what people in my profession are debating quite vigorously right now. It's really two questions. Everyone agrees it's changed. The questions are, how profound are the changes, and what will be the results? And I can lay out very briefly for our viewers and listeners, frame that debate. First, the more pessimistic take is that this is the most profound dislocation of the international system since World War II. The Council on Foreign Relations, a very distinguished organization that I'm a member of, put out a report earlier this summer saying that not since 1944, 45, 46, when the world was almost quite literally destroyed, have we seen this much dislocation. And the specific dislocations and disruptions that this more pessimistic take points to, and even optimists would agree with these, are, first, this shows the fragilities and vulnerabilities of globalization, right? If globalization is deeper connections across borders, more open communication channels, more open travel channels, well, those have also been a lot of transmission channels for the coronavirus. And so, as we are seeing a lot of global populist movements and resistance to globalization, even before the pandemic, this accelerates that. And this shows, okay, globalization is not all a good thing. Second, on more particularly considering that the virus originated in China, and I know the details of its origin are still debated and may never be fully known, but we certainly know it originated in China, and that some of the early malignancy of the spread was accounted for in part by some of the Chinese government's cover up and mishandling of it. This has also accelerated tensions between a lot of other countries and China, and so China's the newly emerging superpower on the global stage. This has accelerated the tensions related to that. Third, it's shown a lot of the strains and, if you will, inadequacies of multilateral institutions. The World Health Organization, which, as you reminded us, did lay out some of the good rules for us. But other aspects of the WHO's response have perhaps been less than ideal. And of course, the American government's, my own government's, recent disfavor with the WHO hasn't helped matters either. I'll just leave it at that. And then finally, that shows that there's been a leadership vacuum here. Historically, when a global crisis were to erupt, usually have one or two dominant powers in the world who can step up and lead and convene others and say, let's come up with a cooperative solution here. The United States has not played that role. China, Russia, the UK, other traditional candidates have not. So that's a pessimistic take. But just very briefly, I'll say the optimistic take, or the one that says maybe there are some good things that can come out of this, is first, we are potentially seeing a reglobalization. Just look at some of the early signs of some of the new vaccines being developed by multinationals. Pfizer, an American company headed by a Greek immigrant, in cooperation with a German company headed by a Turkish immigrant. Right? You don't get a better picture of globalization than that. So we're seeing we need some of these avenues of globalization. Second, multilateral organizations like the WHO, like the G20, like the UN are stepping up in some good ways and are saying, okay, we may have had some missteps, but now we are showing that we still are needed. We may not be perfect, but we're the best thing you've got, and we're taking some needful reforms. And a lot of the rest of the international community has seen that as well. And then third, I think in some ways it's still a little too early to say. We're seeing that some of the vulnerabilities of autocracy and dictatorship in this current moment, as some of the more authoritarian countries have had the least effective responses, with one or two exceptions there. I've seen some of the broadest carnage, and then even some of the more irresponsible populist governments, including the Trump administration in the United States, have shown, I think, some of the failures of that model. So there is some hope that over the next 5 to 10 years, we may see a revitalization and maybe even a growth of democratic governance and more popular accountability coming out of some of the failures of this. But I will stop there. I know that's plenty of grist for the mill, but that's how that's in my little corner of the intellectual universe on geopolitics and statecraft. That's how we're looking at this. I think you're muted, Prabhu.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. If I may take the discussion to introducing Roger. Roger, you've done many things in your life and are still involved in a whole portfolio of activities. But as far as I'm concerned, your great legacy is going to be your contribution of the word and concept of Ken-archia. And it would be very helpful if you would explain to us what you mean by the word Ken-archia. As you've got a journal on Ken-archia now, you've got a sort of center, you're teaching Ken-archia at different universities. Lots of people have become interested in it. And I think it would be very helpful for us first to understand what Ken-archia is, and secondly, what it might have to do in relation to the pandemic. But first things first, what is Ken-archia?
Yes, well, Ken-archia basically signifies an inclusive reconfiguration of Jesus' politics of love. Those who come from a Christian background will be familiar with incarnational theology, the idea that God can be known through the life of Jesus Christ. And so Ken-archia is really developed by those of us who found ourselves in a situation where we were looking at a zeitgeist and a governance in the Western world which seemed to be so at variance with the politics of Jesus or the good news of the kingdom of God and the Christian often legitimated kind of Western governmental systems. So
you're saying you're saying there's a gap or a contrast between the government systems in the West, which are generally considered to be somehow vaguely Christian, and the reality of the teachings of Jesus.
Yes.
So could you just point up that contrast in a way that most people would understand? In what way do you see the gap or the contrast?
Yeah, I mean, Professor Linda Woodhead wrote in 2004 a book called An Introduction to Christianity, published by Cambridge University Press, and it was particularly angled within the religious studies vision of the world. In other words, that people were from many different faiths or none. And in it, she contrasts what she calls power from the top and power from below. Power from the top, much more the kind of Christendom system that legitimates basically really the rich and the powerful, and they are those who bring about peace through, in Roman terms, the Roman peace, but right the way down to now, really even in our democratic Western governments, so often really nothing actually changes because our democratic system seems to be laid on top of a power down from above rather than from a grassroots commitment to relationships and human flourishing in the way that Jesus' life appears to be living it out. In the end, it's love one another. It's even defined in terms of love your enemies. And basically, Ken-archia is endeavoring to take Jesus' teaching, particularly obviously the famous Sermon on the Mount, but the whole of his life and work and death and resurrection, is taking it as a good news for a good governance for the world today. And therefore, our understanding would be that what this pandemic is doing is it's giving us a lens through which we can see how those different kinds of governance work out. And obviously, certainly here in the UK and in the part of the UK here in the Northwest I'm familiar with, it is those people from minority groups, from the poor, from different ethnic backgrounds who seem to be suffering the most. And it's therefore giving us a window on what is wrong with the way that our Western world is going.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I'll turn, if I may, now to Dr. Jonathan Quick. Jono, as he's known among friends, Jono is, of course, in charge of the response to the pandemic, an office or a unit that was created by the Rockefeller Foundation recently, and he was asked to head that up. So congratulations on that, Jono. And we are, of course, wishing and praying for you to be able to do that very well and very successfully and effectively. But you, Jono, are also the author of a very interesting book, The End of Epidemics. And you're also a professor at the Duke Global Health Institute. So wearing these different hats as the head of the Rockefeller Center or unit, the author of this book, End of Epidemics, and of course as a professor, adjunct professor at this university. What is, maybe you could just give us a quick introduction to this whole business of epidemics and where they've come from and so on. And I think you've got some slides ready for us.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Thanks very much, Prabhu, and good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Yeah, so right in the middle of the Ebola outbreak in 2014, I was heading up a nonprofit. We had folks working there, and what we saw was this 4-month delay before responding. And this was the 23rd Ebola outbreak in Africa. The previous 22 ended with less than 1,000 cases and even fewer deaths. But this was an example of mismanagement. and misgovernance, and I would agree with Prabhu on the thin and thick, the foundation and operational. So I took a step back and looked at the last century of pandemics. And one thing, what was really clear is we're going to have these outbreaks, but in a very real sense, the difference between a small outbreak that goes away quickly, like most of the previous Ebola outbreaks, and these catastrophic things is human action or inaction. And they say those who don't learn from history are bound to repeat it. And I just feel and see that we are repeating history over and over again, and not in the best way. So let me just take us through quickly the last century of pandemics. And so if we go back 100 years ago, the influenza pandemic, this came in the waning months of World War I. Wherever the original virus came from, it's pretty clear that the U.S. troop transports to Europe and through the U.S. were a super spreader event. And President Woodrow Wilson was so focused on the war that he would not say anything about the pandemic. He wouldn't listen to the head of the Navy or his personal physician. And as a result, cities were left on their own. There was a fourfold difference in the mortality rate, the pandemic-associated mortality rate among the different cities in the U.S. because they weren't aligned. Half of that difference was explained by three things: pollution, coal burning, poverty, and health status before, just like we have now, inequities. But there were some real heroes. Max Sarkoff, the head of health in St. Louis, he was organized. He got the police, the teachers, everybody in the community, met every day with the media, and had much less death rate than other cities who didn't do that. And a key lesson, because we don't have any more in terms of the basic responses to this virus, where there's no vaccine, no medicines than they did, was that the sooner you start with your social distancing and other interventions, the longer you keep them up, the less the mortality rate. Smallpox. Smallpox was a horrific disease going back at least to the time of the pharaohs, and killed about a third of the people infected and scarred many of the remaining folks. By 1950, Europe and North America had eliminated smallpox. And in 1951, the first head of the World Health Organization, Brock Chisholm, said, let's do for the rest of the world what we've already proven is possible in Europe and North America. Guess how long it took the world's leaders in health to decide to do it? They debated and debated, 3 meetings over 15 years before they actually voted. This guy, D.A. Henderson, in 1966, made sure they got the vote to start smallpox eradication. Guess how many people died while the world's health leaders were talking? 30 to 40 million people, mostly the poor and voiceless in Africa and Southeast Asia. After 15 years of talking, it took just a little over a decade to eradicate smallpox, and it's not been back. The first new human pandemic in modern times was HIV/AIDS. And again, we saw it took 20 years before we actually had effective treatment. And we got off to a slow start in some countries. The U.S. is one, and a number of other countries, because we politicized it and we moralized it instead of just doing good public health. By the year 2000, we had effective treatment. This is the same person 3 months apart, with AIDS and tuberculosis untreated and then treated. Stunning. But this fellow, the president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, said, this is a plot. This is a CIA Western Pharmaceuticals plot. And it took activists to get him out of that. And it also took a moral decision. The historians looking at this, one book is Moral Commitment. It was really a moral commitment by President George Bush to start AIDS treatment. And from a point of basically zero treatment in Africa to over 17 million today, we have turned it around and arguably saved the continent. That's what happens when there's good leadership, good governance, and good action. SARS, the first new human pandemic of the 21st century, classic, came out, not unlike the current coronavirus. This was the first coronavirus to go global. It came from a bat through this cute little delicacy animal, a civet. Doctor so this was in rural China, farmer, villager, whatever, was in contact with the bodily fluids of the civet, cooking a delicacy dinner. The physician who took care of him, Chinese physician from the rural area, came to the 9th floor of the Metropole Hotel in Hong Kong and infected. You can see just the spread around there. Sounds a lot like the current coronavirus, easily spread. Within a matter of weeks, it got to 27 countries, infected 8 million people, and killed 800. But Dr. Gro Brundtland, the Director General of the World Health Organization, on a Saturday in March of 2003, 3 months after it started moving around, basically saw the evidence. It was crossing borders, killing health workers. She declared the first WHO emergency, which really annoyed the mayor of Toronto, because that was one of the places that we had the outbreak. And they had to cancel concerts, but it stopped it. And within 6 months, that SARS was put back in the box and has never returned. And then we come to today. A horseshoe bat somewhere is likely the reservoir where the virus is, got into this weird, possibly, this part is not completely sure, into the marketplace. The marketplace was in Wuhan was a spreader event. But then we got to the COVID that we see now. And there were places along the way where this could have been not put back in the box, but contained much better than it has been. So as Prabhu alluded to, it's not just the food, it's not just the deforestation, it's the population growth, it's the urbanization, it's the international travel, it's the climate change, it's the inequalities, it's health disparities. And we have a world that is much more intertwined, much more interdependent. And not surprisingly, we are seeing this steady stream of influenzas, of SARS, coronaviruses. Nobody in the field is surprised that a coronavirus came out of China. Not all pandemics do. The 2009 swine flu came out of California and Mexico. So we need to be vigilant everywhere. And so the role of good governance is vital. And it's not just the World Health Organization. It's not just the health people. One clear thing is you have to fight a pandemic with a whole of society response. One team, one plan, one set of messages. At the local level, at the national level, and at the global level. And that's where states and countries that had that, Australia, Iceland, Singapore, and states like New York State and New Jersey and all, with one team, one plan, and one voice, they were able to turn not only flatten the curve, but bend it to near zero. And that's the sort of leadership and strong governance that is vital in the face of a pandemic. The one point which we can come back to is the cycle of panic and neglect. Because the problems that we had here in the U.S. and other places didn't start in January, they didn't start 3 years ago. They've been going on 20 years with underfunding of support. And it's the economics and politics of now. If it's not in the headlines, people don't think about it. And so we get this cycle of panic and neglect. And we better take the message from coronavirus and not fall back into the valley of neglect and complacency after having been so ravaged at the peak of panic. So thank you, Prabhu, and back to you.
Yes. What you're saying leads to the question, doesn't it, Jono? If we have huge underfunding of health systems, or if we have health systems that at a national level don't exist, which don't in many countries, then we are ill-equipped to fight the pandemics which are coming, because obviously this pandemic, at some point, God willing, we'll be able to control, but that will not stop other pandemics from coming. We know that other pandemics will come because we've had a history of such pandemics in the past. So nationally organized and globally organized proper health systems are essential. Would you agree? Or do you have something more important than that in terms of controlling pandemics?
That's essential to build the basic health systems. And, you don't need a fancy tertiary hospital with all the latest stuff. The key life-saving interventions are low cost and can be delivered. But I think the other thing is to rapidly mobilize not just the health people, but across the business community, across the political community, because without a vaccine or a medicine, when it's a new pathogen, it's all of these social distancing, and you don't have to crash an economy and close everything in order to contain the virus. But we don't have agreed strategies and agreed ways of working together across countries and within countries to make the best choices on that. Oh. Prabhu, you're...
Myself, of course, yes. So again, just very quickly, what responses do you have, Roger and Will, to what Jonathan has just presented? We don't have an international strategy. Should we be having an international strategy? We don't even have national strategies in many cases. Should we be having national strategies? Why don't we have them? This is common sense. Why did it take 15 years for health leaders from all these countries to talk together before they agreed the first basic global protocol?
Let Roger go first on this if you'd like, and then I'll have some thoughts.
Yeah. I think that we have to be realistic. This is coming from the perspective of the UK, that often our national governments of our nation states are extremely top-down, and they are not necessarily well-versed in what's going on at a local level, nor are they really caring towards the people who have the most needs in those localities. So while I'm not at all dismissing the need for national and international strategies, I actually think that local strategy is utterly key. So my view on this is that we need cities and their hinterlands, that combination of the urban and the rural, to be really working together at a grassroots cultural level, which means that people are hearing the voice of those who are living the experience. So that's the contribution that I believe Ken-archia is making. Jesus is so clear that it's the poor, it's the children, it's women, it's those groups that may not be listened to, first of all, that we need to be restoring their voice.
Yes, but how, Roger? How? I mean, what does it mean in practice? What should the government be doing? I mean, it's been so shambolic so far. Anna Lindsay has just asked, the whole handling of the pandemic in the UK has been so shambolic. What should actually be done now?
I think to a fair degree, we've got to disregard what is being said and done nationally. That doesn't mean I think we should not follow the advice on the basic level of social distancing and hygiene. And when we're shut down, we're shut down. But nevertheless, I think we've really, certainly any of us who have got those connectivities at a local level, need to be working away It's why, for me, the Poverty Truth Commission is such a crucial way of creating a whole new kind of sets of relationships, which then join together those who are at the grassroots with lived experience with those who are the decision makers in that immediate locality. And they can connect into the national scene.
So what you're talking about, Roger, is not widely known. Could you explain this commission to us? Who set it up? What does it do?
It basically came out of South Africa after the end of apartheid. Truth and Justice Commission, it was there. This began in the UK, first of all in Scotland. It's now in many cities. And how it works is that we are seeking to bring together relationally those with lived experience of poverty or mental health issues or coming out of addiction and so on, with those who are the policy makers who up until now tend to do things to people, however caring or expert they might be, not really dealing with the complex issues that people are facing. So these commissions bring those groups together. It would take far too long to explain exactly how, but all I can say is after a pretty long life as both a Christian leader and activist, it feels like this works like nothing I've ever encountered before, and it feels like the kingdom of God alive.
Very glad. Thank you. Will, you were going to come in and either comment on that or perhaps make some points of your own. Please do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just pivoting briefly off Roger's points there. This goes back to my earlier reflection on the importance of good governance so that people can live peaceful and quiet lives, and that is most realized, of course, at the local level. And it doesn't only go one way. It's not just about the king, the sovereign, the president, prime minister, whatever at the top, but oftentimes those local communities can be great laboratories for experimentation, can be great models to others to emulate of self-sacrifice, of neighbor love, so on and so forth. I very much appreciated Dr. Quick's presentation. I myself learned a lot from it. I mean, we're so blessed to have one of the world's leading experts on this subject here with us today. The one slight, I guess, maybe modification I would offer is I certainly affirm the importance of planning and resourcing. My understanding is that there were some pretty good plans put in place in the George W. Bush administration and then in the Obama administration. Part of the problem in the United States is the Trump administration just ignored those or were either unaware of them or were unwilling to adopt them because of contempt and partisanship towards their predecessors. And so I would add, in addition, of course, planning and resourcing are essential, but political will and leadership are also really, really important there. The other thing I will say is that, pandemics never occur in a vacuum, and pandemics are accelerants of existing geopolitical trends. And so in this case, the world was already pretty fragile, pretty unstable in, say, December of 2019, just before the pandemic hits. The United States and China and India, China and a number of other neighbors were already at a moment of severe tension. There already was this emerging great power rivalry is the term that we use. And so when you throw a pandemic on that, it just accelerates that. Or Europe, where, again, a couple of you are now, I know. There already were tensions between EU institutions in Brussels and some EU member states, especially the UK with Brexit, right? And of course, with those pre-existing tensions, then you throw coronavirus in, and it just accelerates those as well. And that, I'm sure in some ways accounts for some of the less than ideal responses in Europe as well. And so that's just the challenge of statecraft, is managing those pre-existing tensions. And then when you have a major crisis like this thrown on top, finding a way to prevent it from getting too completely out of control.
Can I take the conversation to Jono now, if you don't mind, Jono, and ask you, as I understand it, the WHO had anticipated some pandemic breaking out, and they didn't know when, and they didn't know exactly what, but they had anticipated that there would be a pandemic of this sort. Is that right? And how could it have done that?
Yes, indeed. And I'll come to that. I just want to resonate on what Roger was saying about the grassroots. I mean, the last chapter at the end of Epidemics is called Ring the Alarm, Rouse the Leaders. It's all about advocacy and building social movements, because I couldn't agree more. Political leaders are victims of the politics of now. And so if it's not a current issue, they're not interested. So I think getting interested constituencies is really important. Yes, indeed. I mean, the pandemic, exactly what you said. It wasn't, we knew the risk places, but we didn't know the when kind of thing. And I think the initial response on the part of the World Health Organization, and particularly in being measured about when they called the pandemic, because the problem is you're in this damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation, where if you call it too early, then you'll lose credibility. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why we were slow on Ebola, because WHO had gotten hammered about the calling a pandemic for a flu virus in 2009, and the flu virus misbehaved. It wasn't as bad as it was expected to be, and WHO, in a sense, got blamed. And so I think the thoughtful, measured approach to calling the pandemic was a good thing. There were delays early on with China and a few other elements. But if you look at it, immediately WHO was up with the information. They were looking ahead to where it was going. They were supporting the lower income countries, mobilizing a multi-country clinical trial for vaccines and therapeutics, which there isn't any other entity that's trusted by as many parts of the world and the health teams as the World Health Organization. And it's a member organization. I mean, it's our organization, all of ours. And there's a tendency for the members to go to Geneva and make decisions and then go home and complain about the results. But it really is a member organization, and we need to take it seriously. And yes, it's imperfect like any human creation, but the response is to help make it better.
Sorry, Will, do help us to understand why was it, or what was the reason that the American government got so upset with the WHO and decided to withdraw funding and so on? What were actually the reasons for it?
Well, I have not spoken with President Trump in this personally, so I'm only going to speculate a little bit here, so I don't present knowledge on it. But I think it's a few factors. First, you have a pre-existing distrust of multilateral institutions, full stop, whatever they are, right? And so we saw this with the Trump administration on any number of other multilateral institutions. The WHO is already suspect by virtue of that. Second, you have what appeared to be initially, and again, I want to make sure all of our viewers listen carefully to Dr. Quick's comments there on the almost impossible situation the WHO is going to be in. You can never call a pandemic at the right time. It's either a little too early or a little too late. That said, there was a perception by a lot of Americans, including the Trump administration, that the WHO was carrying water for the People's Republic of China too much, was letting Xi Jinping, rather than WHO experts, dictate things like access to early investigations into the outbreak, virus samples, things like that. So that was seen as compromising the WHO's legitimacy. And so those, and then the third is then when the WHO was somewhat critical of the Trump administration's response, and it was a terrible response. So I think the WHO got that part right. As you've probably seen, President Trump, soon to be former President Trump, does not take criticism well. And so all those factors come in, and it was kind of the excuse they'd been looking for the withdrawal. But without making any partisan comments, I can say I highly, highly anticipate that on January 20th, when President Biden takes the oath of office, one of the very first orders he's going to sign that afternoon or the next day will be re-entering the WHO.
Well, we certainly hope so, because America is a leading country in the world, and what America does affects the whole world, whether we like the fact or not. So very much so. Thank you. Now, it is nearly time for us to finish, not quite, but nearly time for us to finish. May I invite Vishal to reflect on what has happened so far, and maybe offer his own comments or his own thoughts, as well as reflections on the comments that have been shared so far?
Well, it's been wonderful to listen to our three panelists, and Thank you for moderating this discussion so well, Prabhu. And we will reflect and study more on some of the comments that have been made and resources to which have been indicated. This is recorded and it will be available online for us to review. And we hope that this will contribute to awakening more grassroots people, thinking people, to take responsibility to, as if all of us become children of God, then managing God's kingdom becomes our responsibility. As children, we manage our Father's kingdom, making sure that His will is being done. And His will is for the poor and vulnerable, that we care for them. So this is, if there has been misgovernance, and if we really want God's will to be done, we have to take responsibility for learning and thinking and growing and maturing to develop a heart and perspective and mind of God on these matters. So once again, thank you very much. And we will look forward to a whole new series from January of bringing such wonderful people to address our constituency. And hopefully we'll be able to do a better job in advertising and publicity.
From my point of view, what matters is not just the number of people watching or listening, but also what impact it has on them. And we already have one person who's come back to us and said, and I quote, "Incredible, just as a human who has stress falls ill, so does the geopolitical system. A revelation for me," Heather Robinson says. We've also had contributions from Binto John and various others. So thank you very much to them. Thank you to you, Vishal, for being the inspiration for this series. Thank you to Jonathan, Will, and Roger for your contributions. But as we still have a few minutes, maybe you have some final thoughts you want to give us before we conclude. So I don't know which of you would like to go first, but if there's one sort of burning message you want to communicate, then this is your opportunity to do it. Who would like to start?
I'm happy to say something.
John.
So I think it's pretty clear. We're, as we said, we're in a riskier world in terms of these outbreaks. They're going to continue to happen, but we can make the world much safer from these pandemic threats. We know what to do. It's not complicated. It's just difficult in terms of the political support and the public support. But I mean, I think an informed public and pandemic literacy is going to help keep us safe. We've got to remember this moment and say we could have made this much less ravaging. And then make sure that we're doing the things that we can and should and know how to do to make the world safer.
Thank you. That's a very reassuring message. We know what to do. We just have to get around to doing it. Who would like to go next? Roger.
Yeah. I would just like to say that I'm very impressed about some of the female leaders around the world and their leadership, particularly with regard to the pandemic. This is the first of these conversations I've been involved in, and it's been an honor. But I'm very unused to being involved in conversations that are all males, and so I do want to just acknowledge the crucial contribution that our sisters have to give to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Will.
My final word will be: I hope that we don't give up on democracy. And this connects with Roger's very good points about reconnecting democracy with people at the local levels, but also Jonathan's on the importance of governance. And the inefficiencies and the liabilities of democracy have been very visible on the global stage recently. When you look, if you were to catalog, kind of the 10 or 15 countries that have had the most effective responses on COVID, South Korea, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, Iceland, Germany, a few others could be mentioned. India's had some, I think, even with some real governance challenges, some strong responses there. They're all democracies, and so in addition to, I think, some of the larger imperatives about democracy being more consonant with human dignity and human flourishing and human liberty, I do think over time we see that democracies are better citizens on the globe. They're the higher contributors to the WHO, and they've had overall better responses on this. And so I hope that we don't despair too much about the failures of democracy, which are also legion. But as Churchill said, it's the least effective form of government except for all the others.
Thank you very much. Well, we are particularly grateful to you and to Jono for waking up early and for making time in the middle of your Thanksgiving celebration plans to participate in this. Thank you very much indeed. And Roger, thank you also for participating and contributing. And may I invite our speakers, our listeners, not only our speakers, to contribute by subscribing to the YouTube channel and to the Facebook page. And thank you very much also to the technical folk helping us behind the stage, as it were, behind the what the public sees. That's Andreas Wieland, who's been kind of leading the charge on this, and of course Finn Schwartz and his other colleague Tamo, who've been helping us. So thank you to everybody, and it's been a great discussion. Thank you, and goodbye for now.